You will probably regret listening to today's episode. I'm just going to put that out there now. And why do I say that? Do you ever learn something and you kind of just wish you didn't know about it? Like, I wish I didn't know about germs. Sometimes I really wish that I didn't know that there's these tiny little microscopic bacteria all over virtually everything. And if you get too many of them, then you're going to get sick and you're going to feel yucky. And, all that sounds like pretty helpful information to know, except for the fact that I have this awareness at all times that I'm just constantly surrounded by germs. I'm a bit of a germaphobe now. Like, I keep hand sanitizer on my desk at work. I keep some in my car. I have some sitting over here by me as I say these words at my desk at home. And, it makes me feel better to have it. But sometimes I wish I just didn't worry about germs as much as I do. Anyway, to get this back on track of what I originally wanted to talk about, there are things in the spiritual reality that we don't know and that we are perfectly happy not to know. And yet, for our own good, we should know them. For example, whose responsibility is it whenever somebody goes to hell? Is it just that person's fault? Or could another person also be responsible for it? Could you be responsible for it? The answer to this question might make us a little uncomfortable, but it's something that you need to know, and you will learn that answer today on the Cross References podcast. Welcome to the Cross References podcast, a Bible study where we learn how every small piece of the Bible tells one big story and how they all connect to the cross and Christ. My name is Luke Taylor, and whenever I was younger, I always bought the greatest hits CDs. And for all you kids out there, CDs are these physical objects that we used to have before Spotify was around, and we could play music off of them, and life would just seem a whole lot simpler then. Back whenever I wanted to buy a group CD, if I wasn't like super familiar with all their music, I would just buy their greatest hits. Like a greatest hits CD, that is something that every band puts out once they run out of new ideas. All right, they put out a greatest hits CD and then you can buy that and you've got all the best songs in one place. So that made sense to me. That seems simplest for me to know where to start with a band. I know some of the music nerds out there, you're probably cringing as I say this. People like my wife, they're probably not going to be happy with with that definition of a greatest hits CD. But that's how I look at it. So a greatest hits CD, they often contain the group's most famous or most popular songs. And as I said, it's all collected right there in one place. So it just makes it all simple for me. And I thought that as I studied Ezekiel 33, I felt like it was Ezekiel's greatest hits. This chapter is a recap or a restating of previous content from the book of Ezekiel. And so as we cover this chapter over the next few episodes, we're going to be looking at things that we've already studied. But let me say this right here. Does that mean you should just check out right now? Like, is all this just going to be a rerun? Well, let me tell you 3 reasons you should keep listening. 1, because not all of you were with me the first time I covered this stuff in Ezekiel. Okay, like for example, today we're going to revisit the content from Ezekiel chapter 3. And that was pretty early in the life of this podcast. And so I have many times more listeners now than I did back then. And so for most of you, you probably haven't heard this stuff at the beginning, and you'll be hearing this for the first time. 2, I'm taking a second crack at some of these ideas, and so I'm going to be even expanding upon them in ways that I didn't do the first time. And then 3, if God considered this information worth saying a second time, then it's probably worth you listening for a second time as well. And so I'm glad to be back from the break that I took over the month of May. I was sharing a conversation I had with a friend. It was an interview I had about the book of Ezekiel. And so I hope you enjoyed that talk. But I'm glad to be back. And we're going to be today in Ezekiel chapters 3 and 33. So Ezekiel 33 is one of those, it's actually one of the few chapters I had actually already taught on before I ever started into this study on Ezekiel. And the reason for that, it's one of my favorite chapters in the book. Even though, as I told you, you're probably going to regret listening to today's episode by the time I get done, but stuff you need to know. So Ezekiel 33, he starts by recapping a calling that God placed upon his life back whenever he was commissioned as a prophet. So in the early chapters of Ezekiel, God appears to Ezekiel. He calls him to do this job, and Ezekiel resists the call. He is not interested when God first calls him. But then God gives him a week to think about it, and God comes back and says that Ezekiel has been called to be a watchman for his people. And a watchman's job is to warn people whenever danger is approaching. Kind of like how someone used to sit up in a watchtower and they'd watch for danger, or there used to be fire towers. People would watch for fires, and people used to do that years and years ago. Well, that is basically what Ezekiel is being called to do spiritually, but also in kind of a physical sense for his people. And this was a heavy calling to place upon Ezekiel, but this is what convinced him to accept it, his calling as a prophet. And this is what finally pushed him to do it. And so Ezekiel is going to take that same calling that was placed on him as a watchman, and he's going to place it upon his listeners in chapter 33. And by extension, I would say that includes you and me. Now, why do I say this is a heavy calling? Well, okay, let's read it and we'll find out. So starting at verse 1, the word of the Lord came to me. Son of man, speak to your people and say to them, if I bring the sword upon a land, and the people of the land take a man from among them and make him their watchman, and if he sees the sword coming upon the land and blows the trumpet and warns the people, then if anyone who hears the sound of the trumpet does not take warning, and the sword comes and takes him away, his blood shall be upon his own head. He heard the sound of the trumpet and did not take warning, his blood shall be upon himself. But if he had taken warning, he would have saved his life. I'll stop there. So, as the chapter begins, it's laying out this scenario right here in which a watchman is warning the people that there is an invading army that is coming. Okay, that's what it means here when it says the sword, when he sees the sword. So the logic here is sound. If an invading army is coming, the watchman is to sound the alarm and wake everybody up so that they can run away or they can fight back or do whatever they need to do. It's to prepare the people to help them escape danger. But if somebody decides they want to ignore this warning, and for whatever reason they would have for ignoring it, if they do that, then that's on them. All right, so again, this is a pretty simple and straightforward concept. If you ignore the warning and then something bad happens to you, that is on you. And so the spiritual application for this is, I would say, pretty clear. Like if you warn somebody about hell or about God's judgment, and if they decide that they just want to ignore that warning, then that's on them. Okay? You warned them and they scoffed it off or they didn't take it seriously. Whatever their reason is to disregard your warning, at the end of the day, you did your part, okay? You warned them. So their blood is on their own hands. That is what it says in this verse. What happens to them from there on out, that is on them. And there's a good cross-reference for this, other than Ezekiel 3, because it says the same thing in that chapter. But another good cross-reference is Acts 20. And Paul is giving the gospel to people, and it is rejected. And so Acts 20, verses 25 through 27, they say this. And now behold, I know that none of you among whom I have gone about proclaiming the kingdom will see my face again. Therefore I testify to you this day that I am innocent of the blood of all. For I did not shrink back from declaring to you the whole counsel of God. So Paul is saying here, I have done my part. I have warned you. You have rejected it. And I'm just going to be moving on. Okay? I am innocent of your blood. So he says, we are, as long as we're straight on that, as long as we're clear, you have been warned. Acts 18:6 is another place like that. It says, when they opposed and reviled him, I think it was Paul again here, it says, he shook out his garments and said to them, your blood be upon your own heads. I am innocent. From now on, I will go to the Gentiles. So you see, if you share the truth with someone, and if they reject you, and if they insult you, You don't have to just stand there and just keep taking it and taking it and taking it. Gracefully exit the conversation or exit the situation and move on. Okay, yes. Jesus has said, blessed are you when people revile you. And once you've been reviled, you're blessed. Okay, good for you. God will reward you because you were standing up for him. But you don't just have to stand there and just try to keep the conversation going and just keep adding more fuel to the fire. Don't just keep heaping up more and more insults on yourself. That's kind of like evangelistic masochism, okay? And that's not what we are called to. I say that because some Christians are like evangelistic masochists. They want the persecution. They want the persecution complex. They want the drama. They want the fight. And so they'll just keep hammering away at people who have already told them they don't want to hear it. And that's not the biblical model that we're given. Paul's model is to say, hey, I tried. You have made your intentions clear. I tried with you, but I'm just going to move on. And so that's what Paul does. As Jesus said in Luke 10, he said, shake the dust off your feet and move on. Okay, you don't have to stay there. You don't have to just keep shoving it down their throats if they don't want to hear it. Now, if you give the gospel to someone and if they don't want to hear it, doesn't mean that there might not ever be a chance to give it to them again someday. Maybe someday another situation will come up and they're going to be receptive to it then. All right. So that's possible. But here's what I'm saying. It's probably not going to be this week. It's probably not going to be this month. Unless they just come back to you and ask for more information, I would say wait a long time before you try that conversation again. And in the meantime, just build a relationship with them, a mutual respect with them. And the ball's in their court if you've tried, and if they said no thank you, okay, well, just keep the relationship going, but the ball's kind of in their court, and maybe someday you can bring it up again, but I'd say don't try it anytime soon, all right? Here's the problem. What if we just never, ever even try? What if we never share the gospel with somebody? Never even give them the opportunity to accept or reject it? Well, then Ezekiel 33:6 comes into play. But if the watchman sees the sword coming and does not blow the trumpet, so that the people are not warned, and the sword comes and takes away any one of them, that person is taken away in his iniquity, but his blood I will require at the watchman's hand. So if a watchman sees that danger is coming, and if he gives no warning to the people, then when the people perish by the sword, it says now their blood is on the watchman's hands. It's not their fault that they were destroyed. Nobody even told them danger was coming. It was the watchman's fault because he didn't alert the people to the danger. And this is how Ezekiel was commissioned back in chapter 3. God said, Ezekiel, if you don't at least try to warn the people about what's coming, then I'm going to hold you partially responsible when they do fall under judgment. Now their blood is going to be on your head. But if you do warn them, then at least they've had the chance, they've had the opportunity, so they could have avoided the punishment. And if they choose not to, then that's on them. It's not on you. So again, right here, Ezekiel is just expanding that burden and placing it upon all of us as well. Anybody who hears the words of Ezekiel and understands what they mean, this is on you now. That's why I said you might not want to listen to today's episode, because this is kind of a heavy burden to lay on us. And that's why it's so important, though, that you understand that you have a role to play in this thing called the Great Commission of Jesus. He said, go out into the world, preach the gospel to every creature. So if you know somebody who needs to hear the gospel, you have a responsibility to share it with them. Because we are not these Israelites. We don't live in ancient Israel. We don't have a bunch of Babylonians bearing down on us. But what we do have is we live in this world where there's the reality of hell, and it's looming over everybody until they get saved. And a lot of people don't even realize the trouble that they would be in for if they were to die today. And so I would just ask yourself this question. If you knew that you had one day left here on earth, who would you want to contact and share the gospel with before you left it? That would be a good place to start, I think. And I'm just going to ask you to pray about that. Just identify those people in your life that you might be a watchman for. And maybe make a list of their names, write that down. Who would you want to talk to if you had one day left? So once you've got your list, here's the next thing I want you to do. Just pray about it. Just pray to God. Just ask Him to give you some opportunities to share the gospel with them, or maybe even to share the gospel with complete strangers. Okay, maybe God wants to open a door that you didn't even see coming. But pray and ask Him if He would. Okay, and just keep praying. Make that your prayer for the next few weeks. And I would say this, within a few weeks, I believe God is going to answer that prayer. I think He's going to give you that opportunity if you pray for it. And then here's the heavy part. When God does answer those prayers and when God gives you those opportunities, be ready to take them. Don't chicken out. Do it. Walk through that door. He opens the door, walk right through it. Find a way to make the conversation you're having with somebody into a spiritual conversation. Talk to them about God and spiritual reality. Warn them about what's coming. Pray for wisdom on what to say. Listen to the last of these verses today. Ezekiel 33, 6-9. So you, son of man, I have made a watchman for the house of Israel. Whenever you hear a word from my mouth, you shall give them warning from me. If I say to the wicked, O wicked one, you shall surely die, and you do not speak to warn the wicked to turn from his way, that wicked person shall die in his iniquity, but his blood I will require at your hand. But if you warn the wicked to turn from his way, and he does not turn from his way, that person shall die in his iniquity, but you will have delivered your soul. So it's one of the great mysteries of the universe to me, as I just wonder, why God chooses to work with flawed, incompetent men like me. But that is what God has chosen to do. And so if you will do your part, God will do His part. And then whenever God does His part, you got to be ready to do your part. Okay, so you pray, God will answer. And when God answers, take that opportunity to share the gospel. All right, pray for those opportunities. God will give them to you, and then take them. How are you going to recognize those opportunities? Look for them. Okay, you say, how will I know when I see it? Am I going to hear a voice from God in my head? Maybe, but here's what I think. I think you'll just know them when you see them if you're looking for them. All right, I'll give an example. A few years ago, I bought a Jeep. I wanted to get a Jeep really bad because I love Jeeps. Now, I've got a Jeep Renegade. That's because that's the only Jeep I could afford. but I love it. Okay, it's a great vehicle. It's just so much fun to go jetting around in. And here's something I noticed when I was looking for a Jeep Renegade a few years ago. Something interesting happened. I started to see Jeep Renegades all over the place. I felt like I was seeing a Jeep Renegade on every street that I drove by. If I ever drove by a car dealership, they might have 200, 300 cars out there on their lot. The only ones I would notice as I drove by was their line of Renegades. It just seemed, all of a sudden, it seemed like everybody had a Jeep Renegade. They were just all over the place. Now, why is that? Well, it's because I was looking for them. And whenever you're looking for something, you're going to notice it. And I'd say the same is true as we're looking for opportunities to witness to somebody. If you are looking for those opportunities, you will find them. If you have a heart for the lost, or if you pray to God for opportunities to share the gospel, if you open yourself up to that, I believe He will show them to you. Because I think it's a prayer that God delights in answering. So I have a big announcement I want to make about the future of this podcast. And it's such a big announcement. I'm going to put out an episode just to make this announcement, probably on Friday. And I'll go into a little bit more detail on that one. But basically, when I started this podcast, I originally wanted to do like just a series of book studies. And I thought, like, I'll spend a couple years in Ezekiel, and I'll do the book of Zechariah, and maybe I'll go into some other book like Matthew or Malachi. I wanted to kind of do the prophetic books, but I just wanted to be jumping around in different books all the time. As this thing has happened, I really ended up spending a lot more time in Ezekiel than I thought I would. And so by the time this is done, I'll probably have spent 4 years going through one book of the Bible, maybe 3.5. But it's gone a lot slower than I thought it would. And so here's what I've been thinking. If I'm going to spend literally years on just one book of the Bible, probably the title of the podcast should more accurately reflect that. Like, for example, that this has been an Ezekiel-based podcast. So I'm thinking of changing the name to something like this. Maybe just calling it the Book of Ezekiel, a cross-references Bible study. And so content-wise, I mean, nothing really is going to change about it. You know, if you're here for the content, you're going to keep getting the same content. But basically, like what I've been doing lately is I've just been talking about the book of Ezekiel, and sometimes I'll go off on tangents, but it's always something that connects with what we're studying in Ezekiel, like I was doing with Egypt. We had like 4 chapters in a row about the nation of Egypt. So I ended up doing like 7 lessons that were what Ezekiel said about Egypt, but I also went off into other topics too related to Egypt and looking at other places of the Bible. So it was all kind of on topic, but it all kind of went back to whatever we were into right then in Ezekiel. But here's why I'm thinking of changing the name of the podcast for that reason, because that will help people who are particularly interested in the book of Ezekiel find it more easily. And so that brings me to part 2 of what I'm wanting to say. When I finish the book of Ezekiel, and I'd say that's at least a year away from now, what am I going to do with the podcast then? Well, I'm thinking I might actually just end the podcast. You know, I might just say, hey, we had a good run and we studied a whole book and we talked about lots of other stuff. And if that's where it ends, I'm happy with that. Maybe I'll go into another book of the Bible. And if that be the case, I would just change the name again to reflect whatever we're studying. And so I'm just I haven't decided yet because it's a year away. So I haven't decided officially, but anyway, I'll put out an episode on Friday and explain my whole thought process on this. And if you're a listener on YouTube, I might change the name of my YouTube channel. Right now, it's just called Cross References. And I might change the name of my YouTube channel to my name, Luke Taylor. And I say that because I put out another podcast on this same channel called Weird Stuff in the Bible. And the Weird Stuff in the Bible has actually taken off a lot more. It's a lot more popular than Cross References. So I thought maybe, it might make sense to change my YouTube name just to something a little bit more generic instead of just Cross References. So anyway, look for those changes in the next couple of weeks. This is just me experimenting to see if I reach more people by doing things this way. So, all right. Thanks for hanging with me. Let me give you some closing thoughts on what we studied today in Ezekiel 33. And so as we close down, I hope you will keep seeking those opportunities to witness. And listen, guys, I'm not expecting you to just go stand on a street corner with a sandwich sign around your body, yelling at people, calling them to repent. I'm not asking you to do that. I'm not asking you to even just go call a friend right now and just start giving them the gospel. Okay? If God tells you to do either of those things, then you should probably do it. That's not what I'm asking you to do. I'm asking you to pray. And I believe that if you pray about it, then God will open those doors for you. And just my admonition then, if God opens the door, have the courage to walk through it. Charles Spurgeon, he had this really epic quote. He said, "If sinners be damned, at least let them leap to hell over our dead bodies. And if they perish, let them perish with our arms wrapped about their knees, imploring them to stay. If hell must be filled, let it be filled in the teeth of our exertions, and let no one go unwarned and unprayed for. You might feel a heavy burden on you right now. You might wish you hadn't turned on today's episode. But you have a duty. You have the duty of a watchman. If you warn people, and if they don't listen, that becomes their choice. Their blood is on their head. But if you don't warn them, and they have no chance to repent, then their blood is on your head. So you can't control what they do. You can only control what you do. And you'll be responsible before God for what you do. So let no one go unwarned and unprayed for. There was this really stupid superhero movie a few years ago. It was called Justice League. I mean, this was like 2 hours. That was one of the biggest waste of time I've ever seen. except for this one moment, this one scene in the movie. This one scene was just so brilliant. Like, I don't know if I will ever forget it. It has stuck with me to this day. And there's like these hostages, and they need to be saved from these giant bug aliens or something like that. And the Flash is one of these superheroes, and he wants to go in there and save them, but he's scared. He's got like super speed. He can move lightning fast. He shouldn't be afraid to just run in there and grab the people, get them away from the bad guys. But this is like his first day on the job, and he's intimidated. He's not ready to be a superhero. And then Batman says to the Flash, "Save one."
Right. Okay. Yeah. Here's the thing. See, I'm afraid of bugs and guns and obnoxiously tall people and murder, and I can't be here. It's really cool. You guys seem ready to do battle and stuff, but full transparency, I've never done battle. I've just pushed some people and run away.
Save one.
What?
Save one person.
Which one?
Don't talk. Don't fight. Get in. Get one out.
And then?
You'll know.
Okay.
So this is like the one scene of the movie that really just struck a chord with me. Batman says, "Save one." Just start with one. So the Flash saves one. And after he does it, he realizes that wasn't so hard. He says, "I can do this. I'm able." And then he goes and he saves another. And another. And another. Because once he realizes that he can get one, he's energized then. He realizes he could get a lot more than just one. And what I'm asking you to do today, guys, I'm asking you to pray. I'm not asking you to save the world. I'm just asking you to try to save one. And then you'll know what to do. Thanks for listening to the Cross References podcast. This has been Luke Taylor reminding you to wash your hands.